Hello, welcome to Queer Cinema Catchup's mini-series on Severance. Today we are discussing Season 2, Episode 7, Chikai Bardo.
And wow, what an episode.
I think before it started, I had Googled it, and it said it was a luxurious, moving piece of television, and I think that's a very accurate description.
There was a thing going around Reddit where someone got to see a screener of the episode before it was released, and they were saying how it was a game changer and really opened up the world, which is very true.
I think we got a lot of answers. Maybe we can start by just quickly summarizing what happened in about a sentence or two.
This episode follows really Gemma and Adam's character, Mark, their relationship, but really heavily focuses on Gemma. And we're getting more insight of what her life is like inside Lumen.
And basically what has happened is Mark has believed that she died in a car crash, but for some reason, instead, she's been taken down to the testing floor, which is beneath the severed floor. She's still Gemma, she still has all of her memories, but it seems that she's been severed many times over because she goes to different rooms which have the names of the files that our innies are working on, like the Cold Harbor one that keeps getting referenced. She goes into these rooms and has to endure different mundane or terrible human experiences, like going to the dentist, writing Christmas thank you notes, being in a plane crash, etc., etc. And at first it seems like she might be a willing participant, and as it goes on, she asks the question, like, what will happen to me when I've gone through all the doors and Cold Harbor's supposed to be the last door? And they say something, but she kind of knows the truth is she probably won't survive, so she tries to escape, leading to the most heartbreaking scene of the episode, in my opinion, which we can get into a little bit later. But what were your kind of reactions to this on an emotional level and on a, like, what does this mean to the series level?
Yeah, I was gripped the whole time. I think that it really gave the opportunity for the actor who plays Gemma to really shine in her role. We've been complimenting all of the performances in the show, especially this season 2, and especially the person who plays Heliar. But yeah, like Gemma really like shined in this episode, and I was gripped. It felt like really frenetic, and just like constantly, the pace was just like constantly changing, and it was really experimental. And it was bouncing between seeing Gemma in the testing floor of Lumen, and then also flashing back and seeing what Mark and Gemma's relationship was like before the accident. We don't know what happened necessarily that led them to be separated. What
was really interesting was the Gemma storyline seems to be told, the main storyline on the testing floor, in real time, but the flashbacks were shot in a way that made it look like it was film, and they were actually being told technically through Mark's memories, because as you recall from last episode, he fell over and fainted, and he's kind of in a, I wouldn't say a coma, but he's completely passed out, and he is traversing his own memories of Gemma, his wife. And there were very interesting parallels between the memories we do get and things that are happening to Gemma in this kind of upside down, twisted world of the testing floor. For example, I'm trying to think of I can't think of an example, but yeah, there were small, subtle details that were the same in each. Like I can't think of an example, but...
What are you trying to think of examples of?
I remember someone had pointed out online that in a previous season, Mark had said, Gemma hates writing Christmas thank you notes, so it's interesting that one of the Lumen doors leads her to a room where she's stuck with this mysterious man who's
in all the rooms. And seemingly torturing her, but also seems to be in love with her.
Yes, and he's the one who's making her write the Christmas notes, and she goes, it's always Christmas, implying that for that severed version of herself, that's her only life experience, is waking up, it's Christmas, she has to write all these thank you notes. Her hands are cramping, they're covered in ink. She's been in there for hours, it seems like.
And then as we're bouncing between the past and the present, we're learning slowly that some of the dialogue that happens in these partitioned rooms were said between Mark and Gemma.
Yes, that's what I mean, the parallels.
Yeah.
So are they recreating her experiences? What are they doing?
How do they have insight? How do they know that happened? Were they recording her beforehand? Because one of the ones was when Gemma's like leaving, she says, I love you. And then Mark doesn't respond. She's like, I said, I love you. And he's like, oh, I love you too.
Yes.
That's what happens at Christmas.
Yes,
She's writing the card and then she leaves and the man's like, I love you. And he's like, did you hear me? I love you. She's like, I love you too. And then she leaves. So it was kind of reversed and flipped. But yeah, it's kind of repeating in some moments, because then we didn't see, like, the airplane thing was really, I wonder what that's all about.
And it was, there's like an airplane crash, and it's also interesting, her clothing is different for each room, and Gemma seems to know which room is associated with which clothing. Like when she first sees this red dress she has to wear, she goes, oh crap, because she knows she's going to somewhere that makes her teeth hurt, even if she doesn't know it's the dentist necessarily.
Yeah.
But they're all very stylized outfits, and on the plane crash she was looking very 80s. So it was very intriguing what's going on here.
And the Christmas one looks very 50s.
Yes.
And then overall, like the flashbacks to Gemma and Mark is, I was telling Allison, I was like, it looks like it's the 70s. Does it mean that the show takes place in the 90s? And you said that, well, they spoke about this, Ben Stiller did, and they wanted to give it a timeless look. So it is stylized to look kind of out of time.
But it's not necessarily a clue as to what's going on. I mean, it could be, that could be a misdirect from the creators saying, oh, we want to make it look timeless, when in reality it's some sort of big twist. Yes, but I mean, for me, this episode was emotionally extremely impactful because you understood, first of all, the grief the Mark and Gemma experienced as a couple who couldn't conceive children, and that was mostly what was driving their storyline in the past. But also the grief that these two individuals have. Mark believes Gemma is dead and is longing for her. Meanwhile, his innie is working on the floor directly above Gemma, who is not severed for most of the time in this testing area, and knows and seems to have either been forced or made the choice to step away from Mark. And she's even told cruelly at one point by this awful man, your husband has moved on without you and has a daughter now. Which isn't true, and Gemma, I think, says, I don't believe you, which speaks to the strength of their bond, but just so heartbreaking. And then, I forget where I was going with this, but yeah, there's this horrible scene where Gemma finally tries to escape, and she gets to the elevator, and she comes up, and we kind of already know this, but you still hope she's going to get out, and the elevator opens, she's on the severed floor, she's walking forward, and then Mr. Milchek appears and blocks the way out, and it's that big, long, black corridor that Irv has been painting since last season. And he's like, Miss Casey, you need to go, what's going on? You need to go back down. And she's sort of like, how long have I been like not here? Like, what's going on? I'm confused. And he just sends her away. So she's made the escape, transported into another consciousness that doesn't quite know what's going on, but knows that something's not quite right, and then is being forced to turn back around. And I think she says, the last thing she says is, Miss Casey, is where's? And then she goes down the elevator, kind of wakes back up in the elevator as Gemma realizes that her attempted escape was completely futile. And apparently she says, Mark, I didn't hear this, and like backs into the corner and looks very defeated and full of grief, which is a parallel image to earlier in the episode where the character Gemma had a miscarriage in the shower and knelt down in the same way.
And so what's interesting about this episode is it confirms that you can be severed in more than one way, because as you were saying, on the testing floor, Gemma, for what we know, is the Gemma, like the outie Gemma, and then on the severed floor, she's Miss Casey, which is like the equivalent to like any Mark and all that, like they don't know what's going on in the outside world. And then on the testing floor, in these separate rooms, Gemma is also severed into all these different people. And can I quickly just read off what all the rooms are?
Oh, yeah.
I
mean, there was an Allentown, which is kind of near me, where my family lives in Pennsylvania.
So each room, like instead of having like a room number, it was just Allentown, Carnes, Drainsville, Loveland, Billings, St. Pierre, Zurich, Wellington, and Gemma notes that a door that was unnamed finally has a name, and it's called Cold Harbor, the only room she has not been in.
And it's the last, I don't know if she hears this piece of information, but we learn it's the last room she will ever enter. And when it happens, I think she does hear this, the man says to her, he says this really strange thing to her that I can't quite remember, like, everything will change and we will present you to the world, and what will happen to Mark, same thing. And then she says very hilariously and bitingly, can you just speak normally?
Yes.
Which we laughed
really
at.
Refreshing.
And it felt like, yes, what's going on? But that said, this episode gave us a ton of information and a lot of answers. So do you have any idea, like, what do you think's going on? Any mysteries you feel like you're kind of unspooling? Any theories you have?
Well, I just want to emphasize one more time is we talked about how Mark is passed out this episode because he's recovering from having
the reintegration kind of sped up.
And so it's kind of like through his mindset that we're getting this really frenetic, like chaotic, like bounce between the past and the present. And it's not necessarily told through his viewpoint.
Like lyrical almost.
Yeah, it was lyrical. Yeah, but it would be like all of a sudden like Mark would be like on the severed floor, but all the lights would be out, and then one light would turn on, and the camera would like zoom out, and then the light would turn on, and zoom out again.
It would like tilt.
It would tilt, spin, and then there's this really cool shot that was like really hard to achieve, but it looks really simple. Is the camera's like on the ground, like zooming around the room, and it like rotates around like what you think is one of the innies' feet at their computer, and it spins around, comes up, and we're like. Alice and I both thought it was first.
I thought it was down.
It goes up because it starts at the feet, moves up, and then and then we're like, who the hell's that? And we're in a different room, and there's four people that all look like the innies, and they're on computers, and they can see the innies' faces in the computers completing the files.
And as a reminder, these files are the names of the doors. So whatever is going on, it's all connected, and I think it's supposed to be directly beneath them. was my, like, I think it's also on the testing floor. Was
Okay.
because that's where that man was. He kept coming into the room with the security guard character who I can't remember his name. Or not, the kind of, the muscle that keeps, that's around Helena a lot.
And so as far as theories, I don't really have like a big theory. I want to hear yours, but my smaller thought is, I don't remember I mentioned it in episode 1, but I definitely said to you at one point about the water tower, because there's the teardrop or water droplet, and in this episode, the episode starts with Miss Casey or Gemma getting her blood drawn by Sarah Bernard is dressed up as a nurse. And I think like where either on the vials or like where the blood's being put into is that water droplet. And so I definitely think there's some significance there. And I was at a dinner last night and someone was speaking about, and what's also revealed is what you talked about, is Miss Casey, Gemma, has a miscarriage with Mark.
Yeah.
And I was at a dinner last night and I was talking about, they brought up Severance and they hadn't seen the episode yet, and I said I had. I was very hush-hush, I didn't reveal anything. But one of them was talking about how they went back and rewatched season 1. And there's one scene that I kind of forgot about where I think it was Mark meets a woman, Mark and Devin meet a woman on their walk who had a baby and was severed in her pregnancy.
So there is a birthing, there's an episode where Devin gives birth, and then she goes, it's like she's done it in like kind of an experimental, what's that called? Wellness kind of center, where there are these different cabins that you can rent out. So she goes looking for coffee, and then she meets a woman, they have this conversation, the woman's going to give birth to, and then later on she meets the woman in a park and realizes the woman doesn't remember her, and she's like, have they been doing severance on people who don't want to experience childbirth? So yes, that is a plot point.
And so this episode really made a point to just show how distraught Gemma was going through this miscarriage. And I wonder if there's like some tie in, because it shows us a lot of events, but everything is kind of out of place in time. And what they didn't show us is like how Gemma gets connected with Lumen in the first place, like how she ended up there. And so I'm wondering if there's more to the story that will be revealed later on of why, if she was the one that sought out Lumen and she knew that she always had plans to go down there, and if it had something to do related to pregnancy, giving birth, or something like that. Like if they promised her something, maybe the IVF treatments that they were doing after she had her miscarriage didn't work, and they promised her something, and that's why she's like down in the testing floor, and now she realizes she's being tortured and she's trapped.
So that's like one of my big theories as well. And I think, so even when you mentioned getting the blood drawn at the beginning of the episode tied to Lumen, do you think that there was something in her blood that marked her as a good candidate for this kind of testing, so that maybe they were aware of her? And then I think, yes, she was very desperate to conceive, and also she noticed how much it was impacting Mark, even though he said, it's okay, we can stop, but she knew that he really wanted this too. And so she's highly motivated both personally and for the sake of her relationship to have a child. And we noticed they go to the fertility specialist, and the man who's beneath, you pointed it out, who's doing all the testing on her, is in the doctor's office. In
the outie world.
So perhaps there was a moment we didn't see where maybe the doctors approached Gemma and said, we have a plan that will help you get pregnant. Do you trust us? And maybe she went willingly, or maybe it was like, yeah, I'm interested, and then they kidnap her. It's kind of unclear. But I definitely think she didn't intend to disappear on him, because we see the scene right before she leaves and gets in this accident, and she tells Mark, you should come. I'm going to a party. We're going to play charades. I love you. The scene you referenced, hey, I love you too, and then she goes.
And also you say accident, but it's accident because they haven't shown us.
Yes.
She just leaves, and we kind of piece everything together. Police come to the door, and we very comically, it was well edited, but like Mark standing at the door for so long, not answering it.
I mean, it was so moving and made me feel so achingly sad, but then it was hilarious when you said that. And then the last shot, did you notice how like the dark filled Mark's face, except it was so...
You go and see his mouth, his eyes were covered.
Oh my gosh, that leads to my next theory.
What is it?
So, do you remember in season 1 when they go to the Kier room or whatever it is where all the Kier paraphernalia is, and then there's the wall of smiles? And like, every person here is like somebody, it's like just a wall of teeth, and Irv's really into it, everyone else is kind of like whatever. It's a place where Lumen's a company that helps all these people. Here's some people we've helped. And then Helly jokes like, are we dentists? And then weirdly we do see a dentist. And are they trying to create a consumer product, a chip where we as consumers can turn off our consciousness or split our consciousness for every unpleasant task or difficult human experience?
I think you're onto something with that.
Because I think that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that people would, of course, want to do that, even though it's very ill-advised, and that's like what makes us human. But I think that's what's going on. And I think it's possible that Gemma and Devin, perhaps this birthing center is the place that got them kind of caught up in the lumen of it all, because they're illicitly testing it out. I do, as a child of a lawyer, I have some questions about all the things they're doing. This doesn't seem very legal, no. But I think that's what's going on. Mm-hmm.
And then I would be really curious to hear what the meaning of the episode's title means.
Oh, of course, I almost forgot. So I might not be pronouncing it correctly. Chikai Bardo?
I looked at the pronunciation, it's Chikai.
Chikai. I said it wrong in the beginning, and everyone knows I hate that. Okay, so in Tibetan Buddhism, Chikai Bardo, Chikai, okay, Bardo. Yeah, okay. Chikai Bardo, it is a state, of an intermediate state, when death occurs or when you experience death. And I kind of learned more about this, which, hang on one second. Okay, so basically what I learned is it's a state between life and death, and then there is sort of this experience of light, which is clarity of what life, consciousness, everything is all about. And if you move toward enlightenment, you're sort of passing on and you abandon attachments. But if you don't, you actually fall out of this state and you go through other states before you can reach enlightenment.
Oh, so you think that she's falling through these...
I just think it's like thematically really interesting because she's kind of hovering between life and death, and her consciousness is being split so many times. Mm-hmm. And then Mark similarly is kind of hovering between life and death in the episode in a way, because he seems to be very ill. And when he wakes up, I'm so curious too. We'll talk about this next, but Dr. Ragabe said there might be some gaps because he hit his head, implying that he might have lost some of his memories. So when he wakes up, he's just seen all of these memories of Gemma. His sister says, "Where have you been?" And he just looks so sad because he's just been with his wife who's passed away. But I'm wondering if there's a chance he's closer in time to when she first passed away and doesn't have a lot of his memories after. Interesting. Which would be sad. But let me see, I can read more about this very quickly, I suppose. Yes, the clear light, which represents one's innate Buddha nature, recognizing and merging with this light can result in liberation from the cycle of rebirth. But if you don't recognize the light, that's when you kind of go back through all the cycles. So it's just, and then, the idea that if you're trying to sever yourself from negative experiences, which negative experiences can be seen like a death, you're not able to achieve that rebirth or that growth. Yeah. That's kind of how I see it, maybe.
Yeah, I think as the show goes on, it'll become clear what this title means. It's a little too large for me to wrap my brain around. I will say it's interesting with these different rooms. They made a point when Gemma is in the dentist office. When she comes out, she like makes a point to points how like her mouth is really sore and how she's like, how long have I been in there? And then when she's in the Christmas room writing all those letters, she comes out, she's like, oh, my arm, like it hurts so bad.
Physical.
So these like physical painful things. Now we didn't see every room, I don't think, but we did see the airplane also. But that kind of breaks up I don't know what these like physical pains are, but that seems to be a more like
a higher level.
Higher level where it's not something physical where it's more
I think
emotional.
it's like a psychologically interesting sci-fi idea because we've all heard that phrase, the body keeps a score, right? So it's like you might not remember a traumatic memory, but your body does, and you have similar traumatic responses to things because of what you've experienced in the past. And so this idea of severance, could you really cut yourself, and that's what they're probably testing, cut yourself off from intense grief, intense physical danger, because your body is going to remember experiencing those experiences, in my opinion. So I find it, I don't know if it's really possible. I think Reuben might be a little bit of false advertising, perhaps.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so we just need to end with something just for ourselves. So, all season long we've been saying it.
It's very sad news.
Where the heck is Miss Cobell? Where is she? I missed her.
They stopped mentioning her until this episode. At the very end of the episode, Devin...
It was the beginning. It was the beginning.
Really?
Was it the middle or the beginning?
Oh, I remember. I thought it was like 3/4 in, because then you made a note. You're like, it's really interesting because they're giving two characters making really bold decisions. And I thought it was like leading up. I thought it was like coming to a crescendo.
I think it was like in the middle. Like it might not have been because they didn't have many scenes with Ragabi and Devin. It was mostly focused on Gemma and Mark. It doesn't really matter.
Okay. But I thought it came I thought it was like the darkest hour because it was like, so what happens in the scene is Mark is still not doing well. Devin's asking Ragabi like, what is going on? Like, what's happening to my brother?
Also saying you're not allowed to do anything more to him.
And so, like, Devin feels really lost, and so she pulls out her phone. She's like, well, you know what? I'm going to call Harmony Cobell. I have her number. And then Ragabi looks shocked. She's like, you can't call Harmony Cobell. She's with Lumen. And then Devin's like, well, no, she's left Lumen. I'm going to call her. Like, I don't know what to do. And Ragabi's like, starts packing up her stuff. She's like, if you call Harmony, I can't be a part of this. And it seems really suspicious.
And then she like leaves.
She leaves. And so you were saying how like it was really interesting because Devin's like going to make a really bold decision. Ragabi makes a really bold decision.
It's good writing.
And it was really good, strong writing. And so I guess in my mind, it maybe didn't play out like this, but it's like leading to this really like intense emotional thing. And then we're like cutting to Mark and Gemma, and we're like realizing that it's like leading up to Gemma about to get in the car accident is what I saw.
I mean that's possible. I just didn't mean it was like the very end. Yeah.
So there's only 3 episodes. There's 3 episodes left of the season. Where do you think this show is going to the finale? Will Audi Mark? Okay, let me simplify it. Will Audi Mark and will Audi Gemma meet each other by the end of the season?
Yes. Well, I don't know if they'll both be Audis.
In present day.
Yes. I don't know if they'll be Innies or Audis. I do think we'll get a scene with them together. I think the last episode might be called Cold Harbor, so I think we'll get whatever's behind that door.
Mm-hmm. I think that in season 1, we get the reveal that Mark realizes that his wife is still alive. And so I think that a nice pairing for the end of season 2 is we get a glimpse of Audi Mark and Audi Gemma together, and then a very dramatic
ripping apart.
They get ripped apart.
Or they die.
The season ends.
I wouldn't be surprised if one of them dies. For real. I'm serious.
I could see that too.
Death is coming to Severance.
It's not going to be Mark though.
I think it could be. I think it could be. Even though I know Adam Scott's really involved in the production, I just think they're not shying away from bold storytelling decisions.
That would be
and reintegration. It
one of those
seems very
boldest
dangerous.
things I've ever seen.
You heard it here first. Watch out, Mark. I hope that doesn't happen because I really
yeah, you're kind of like
death and destruction. I really love Mark. I really loved Adam Scott and Gemma, who is played by. She has an interesting name, Daichin Lockman. I think might be how you say it. But she was incredible as well. Very moving performances, and so I don't want them to die. Even though they're playing with my emotions. I want Mark and Helly to end up together, but I want Mark and Gemma to end up together. And how am I able to reconcile this romantic challenge? Yeah. I can't.
I don't think Mark will die at the end of the season, but this show, especially this episode, made me question, like, how much further can this show go? You know, like, it really felt like we'd get answers and things would wrap up, and obviously this is much bigger than what was even presented in season 1. And you've been saying throughout that the writers have been saying that the questions that you thought you had originally, they'll give you those answers, but then it will just open up to more questions.
I mean, I think if Severance is something so big and has so many applications, I do think there's a lot of storytelling potential. And they've also hinted that there are other Lumen facilities across the world. So there is a lot of room for story. I just don't know how long we'll follow our characters. I know that you look sad.
I'm sad.
You look like you're not here for that.
You lose Mark, you lose the show, in my opinion.
What about Helly?
Yeah, you lose her. You lose Helly, you lose the show also.
But I just think if you take, like, look at Game of Thrones, it's like that's what hooks people. Like when you actually, there's real stakes and the people you care about can perish.
I'd say that Game of Thrones, though, is much more an ensemble. And yes, each ensemble character has its lead. And you're like, don't you dare kill that character. And they kill them. And it's so shocking. But this just feels so much more like smaller and contained. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just like I feel so emotionally attached to Mark. I feel so attached to Helly. And then in this episode, they did a really good job in making me feel emotionally attached to Gemma. But because she hasn't been this main presence in the show, I feel like it would still be like shocking and sad.
100%.
But I could see that happening more than Mark. Like if Mark dies at the end of this, like you very well could be right. Mark ends up, like I'm like, Oh, that would be shocking, and that's what Game of Thrones did, and it shows that it can be done and still hold my interest. But
like
it's hard for me to.
as a counter, I think it does speak to the character work they're doing. Like you feel so drawn into the characters, and you want what's best for them. But like we're joking about how we want Patricia Arquette, and we do want her. But I will say it's not. I'm noticing she's gone, but it's not taking away from my enjoyment of the series at all, which is incredibly impressive to me because she is such a presence in season 1, and she adds fear, she adds humor, she adds like propulsion to the narrative, and to take her away as much as they have, I would never have predicted that going into season 2.
No.
And if you told me that, I would have been like, oh, season 2 is going to not be as good, and it's just as good. So
it's not true. And we had some doubts too. I don't know if we brought it I know we're trying to wrap this up. Like, oh, and also another thing. So I don't know where to end this, but we talked about how, and I don't know if this is true, but apparently like writers were swapped out. They had like some real struggles with season 2.
Interesting.
And so I was really afraid that the second half of Severance wasn't going to hold up. But honestly, like it has continued to rev up and been better. I will say though, episode 4, you had a really strong emotional attachment to it. It's really good where Irv revealed, like
I love that one.
Faces Helena and makes it reveal that
she's a mole.
She's been a mole this whole time. And you even went back and you like, it was one of those episodes where you like had to rewatch it again because you like had to like watch it happen.
I'll probably rewatch this one again.
Okay, that was my question is like, have you rewatched this yet?
No, I will because it was an excellent episode of television.
Yeah, it really was.
Give it an Emmy. Specifically, the writing on this episode.
Yes.
I loved episode 4, but I mean, maybe it's like whatever you've seen most recently, but episode 4 was weirder, more experimental, and it stuck the landing, whereas I think this episode, and that's why I love that episode, this episode from the beginning, from the moment it started, I was just so drawn in for so many different reasons.
And it transformed the show. Yes. Whereas episode 4 still, while they were outside for the first time, the innies, it still had that like glossy apple look, but then in this episode, like visually, yes, they're like using a different like on everything. There's like a grain on it, but you like feel more of the humanity. Because even with the Audis in the show, it always feels cold, really blue, like harsh daylight. Whereas this was like much warmer, and it really just the show has really evolved in this episode. It's really good.
It's incredible.
Yeah. So we recommend please go back if you haven't yet and check out each episode. We've done a review of every single episode this season. Please share your thoughts on this episode, and then if you want to go back and like look at episode 1, 2, see kind of how our thoughts have transformed and evolved over the show so far. And we're like constantly, interacting with the few comments that we do get, but we do love the conversation. Share your theories, share your thoughts, what you like, dislike, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.